Hey, and thanks for taking the time to watch this week's Oldtown short, Shine Like Ricky. There are a lot of things that happen in our lives and in the world around us that we simply don't understand, aren't there? Things that we don't have all the answers to and we can't explain. Some things we work our whole lives trying to figure out, learning a little bit at a time by the experiences we encounter. And scientists, inventors, and a myriad of other passionate and driven people dedicate their lives and their work to solving equations, answering questions, and providing proof. There's a story in the Bible about Jesus taking a few of his friends on a hike. Now, the Bible has lots of stories about mountaintop experiences. Well, in this story, Jesus climbs a mountain with his friends Peter, James, and John. As they're about to reach the top, Jesus is transfigured, which is a fancy word for his physical appearance changes, and he becomes something more beautiful. Scripture says, suddenly his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Can you imagine? Now, if you and I were on a hike and we saw something like that, we might just think that we were tired from the climb, or maybe we're a little dehydrated, so we might grab a water bottle and take a drink. But what happens when we realize that everyone else is seeing it too? And the story doesn't end there, because then we see two people who we've never seen before. But wait, you start to recognize them from books that you've read as Moses and Elijah. Then all of a sudden, the sound of blowing wind and rustling trees and chirping birds stops. And in the stillness, we hear the voice of God saying, "This is my child, the beloved. Listen to him." And then as quickly as it began, it's over. What in the world did we just experience? How do we begin to explain that one? And where do we even start to find a fragment of proof or understanding? Well, it's in situations like this, my friends, that you don't. In situations like this, you simply allow yourself to be present, to experience, and to believe. For the past month, through our daily devotionals, we've been sharing sacred surprises. Sacred surprises happen all the time in our everyday lives, but only to those who allow themselves to be present, to experience, and to believe, and who don't need to know the hows and the whys. My friends, faith is not about having all the answers, but on the contrary, it's about learning to love and to live in the mystery and in the things that we can't fully explain. It's not only knowing that God is with us, but more importantly, that God is within us. Okay, now for those of you that enjoy structure, organization, and answers, I'm sure you're starting to feel a little uncomfortable right about now. So let me share a few facts and a little background. In the church, we usually hear this story of Jesus' transfiguration halfway between Christmas and Easter. It always comes just before Ash Wednesday and the beginning of the season of Lent, because it marks the transition between Jesus' public ministry and the story of his passion. You see, Jesus' friends had known him as a great rabbi, mentor, and teacher, but they didn't fully understand who he was. As they headed up the mountain that day, the disciples witnessed who Jesus really was. And it was only then, when Jesus was able to let his true self shine, that the presence of God could shine through him. Every time I hear the story of Jesus' transfiguration, it always brings me back to an experience that I had years ago. As part of my seminary training, I did a 6-month internship as a student chaplain at a psychiatric hospital. On Friday afternoons, I led a worship service for a group of 15 to 20 residents. I remember one particular week reading the story of Jesus' transfiguration. Now, our worship was quite casual. We'd open with a song, we'd have a call to worship, we'd read from scripture, and then instead of a set sermon, we'd share a time of questions and answers. Now, you never knew what kinds of questions or answers would come out, and half of the people gathered would sleep through our entire discussion. But there were 6 or 7 residents who would usually participate, sharing their thoughts and their ideas. The person who always comes to mind was a young man named Ricky. Whenever Ricky came to worship, he couldn't wait to participate. Many times he'd ask to read scripture or lead us in the call to worship. During our prayer time, I always asked for joys and concerns, and every week Ricky would start the sharing, telling us that his concern was for his grandmother, and he'd ask us all to pray for her, while his joy, week after week, were all of his friends at the hospital. Ricky always had a smile on his face, and he always sang the loudest of the whole group. I remember asking the nurses if Ricky was always this excited, and they told me that he usually was, but especially on Fridays when we had worship. Well, because we were talking about the Transfiguration, I asked the group what things they could think of that changed the way they looked. Some of the answers that were shared included how one of the nurses had gotten a haircut and changed the way she looked, or how the main hallway had been painted and that changed the way it looked. Then one resident commented, "Yeah, but those things don't shine. Kelly, didn't the reading say that Jesus shined?" So we started talking about shiny things, like the silver foil that the sandwiches had been wrapped in at lunch, or a flashlight that one of the residents had in her room. Finally, one of the older gentlemen, who didn't usually say very much, said, "Didn't Jesus shine because he knew that God loved him?" There was a few moments of silence, and then he went on to say, "It's kind of like Ricky. Ricky's so filled up with God's love that it shines right out of him." Though I was not standing on a physical mountaintop, I truly had a mountaintop experience that day. Friends, I would urge you to search within yourself to find what it is that makes your true self shine. Then I'd encourage you to be like Jesus and like Ricky, allowing the presence of God to shine through you.